talk. So the motivation of why I wanted to do the talk is I find often that when I hand off Drupal sites to clients, there is usually an initial sort of like shock. This didn't look how I expected it to. I expected like the user interface to be more intuitive. So Drupal out of the box, I think, leaves a lot to be desired. But clients don't always have the money to pay for it. I work at ThinkShout, which is a development agency in Portland, Oregon, and we work primarily with nonprofits, so their budgets are not very large. So when you say, hey, we could spend some money making the admin interface looking a little nicer so that your user, you'll have to spend less money on training, and your users will be able to sort of more intuitively find their way around and accomplish what they've come to the site to accomplish. I'm usually stonewalled, and they want all of the dollars that are available to be going to make the site a little bit snazzier. So the goal of the talk is, as site builders and developers, or maybe product owners, what sort of decisions can we make when we're building these sites that will make the admin interface that Drupal gives us out of the box a little bit more palatable than what it does out of the box, without necessarily having an impact on budget. So can we be smart while we're building so that we can just make the right decisions when we have that fork in the road, as opposed to investing a lot of resources, design time, whatever else, into designing a more complicated and custom admin experience. And with that, I will officially kick off. So the talk is titled The Drupal Admin Experience, Plain and Simple. And the first question we want to ask is, why do we even want to modify Drupal's admin experience to begin with? And the reason, or there are several reasons for this. Picking up new technology is challenging. So our focus as site builders is to make Drupal work for all of the folks that we're going to be building sites for. And that could be from a mom and pop soap operation, I am from Portland, Oregon, to like a multi-million-dollar television network if you work for one of the big agencies. And the reason why I specify those examples is the range of clientele that we could be building sites for is that there's a huge technical gap in the folks that are going to be managing the content in each of those two cases. Our soap shop, it might be a retired couple who just wants to get online and sell some soap, whereas a TV network might have a full-time technical staff of 5 people or more working tirelessly on developing content for their site. But regardless of the level of technical expertise of the content managers, they are going to be happier if the admin interface is a clean and simple one, as opposed to one that requires a lot of ramp-up time to learn. Especially if you consider hiring new employees, what the onboarding cost is for getting them onto your site and developing content for your platform. And while it's certainly the case that Drupal is nearly perfect out of the box, regardless of how attractive Drupal is, we need to put a little bit of effort into getting folks to buy in to what we're building for them. So it is in fact the case that picking up new technology is challenging. Regardless of how good the UX is, learning a new tool always requires effort. There are many industries dedicated to reducing the learning curve across many types of technology. Software as a service applications are a good example. You have the service being provided, removing the need to build that, and maybe providing you a clean API to process your payments or do this, that, or the other. And the barrier to selling stuff is then lowered because all you have to do is learn the API that Square gives you or whatever, as opposed to building it yourself. There are older, more analog technologies like the human language, where we have Rosetta Stone or other things like that, all working to lower the barrier to entry to that technology. And this is important because if a user is frustrated with the technology, they're just going to throw it away. Users have come to expect very low barriers to entry in the form of excellent UX. And that's because there's a lot of technological competition on the market. If we as Drupal developers want to keep up with whatever company just got its Series A, we need to put some polish on Drupal. And I make that joke to say that clients often come to me and say, like, I saw this on Airbnb, or I saw this on Facebook, and I very often chuckle to myself because it's almost always a fair point. but equally as many times developed with a budget 100 times larger than what this client is bringing to the table for their tool. So it becomes our job as developers to approximate the experience of those tools as closely as we can, understanding that we're not going to, we're never going to have the size of budget as the appetite for the features would need. So what can we do in this case? We are forced to look at the tools that these hypothetical clients want us to build and extract the design principles that are making those tools good and replicate those at a lower cost. So the third reason that we want to modify Drupal is that good first impressions matter a lot. It definitely is the case that it's important that we lower the barrier to entry. People are going to get frustrated and throw it out. That first impression is going to be particularly important when users view whatever you've built for them, because that's going to determine how much they trust you from that point on during the project lifecycle. In particular, I'm thinking about like the field of behavioral economics, which has sort of become the hot field in economics. And folks like Gladwell, who write and sell a lot of books, tell us that in the worst case, you have milliseconds. In the best case, sometimes you have 2 to 5 seconds to make a good first impression. Because as people, we react quickly to information that's put in front of us, and we have to. I would be a very ineffective human if I didn't triage decisions extremely quickly, given the amount of information that's thrown at me in a given day. Now, your clients who have invested a lot in the Drupal site that you've built them will have a greater tolerance than a user who downloads an app and that wasn't designed particularly for them, because they've literally bought in. But the importance of a good first impression does not go away. I find it particularly important for the content managers that I build sites for because it creates a sense of empowerment right off the bat if they don't have to ask you questions about how do I use this tool. And that creates a snowball effect. They engage with the tool, and they have a goal when they want to start, that gets them to want to engage with the tool. And if they don't have to ask any questions and they get the reward that they expect when they engage, then that starts a snowball. You get the goal achievement cycle that makes crummy Facebook games like Farmville something that many, many, many people download even though you're not doing anything. The second piece of why I think that it's important to make a good first impression for content managers is back to the trust point. When a user doesn't understand what you've given them, they become a little bit critical of your expertise. Whereas if they're able to use it right away, you get expertise capital in the same way politicians, or like Obama comes in with political capital and gets a bunch of stuff done right when he first gets elected. So you can spend this capital over the course of the project to save your clients from themselves when they're going to make bad decisions, because they trust you that they've hired you to do a job and they shouldn't be doing your job for you. They'll be experts in their field and you can be an expert in yours. So what can we do to make the default Drupal experience more attractive to all walks of content managers? And the first few of these are going to be very low-hanging fruit, insofar as almost every site builder I talk to will have done these things to a Drupal site that they deliver to a client. But it's not the fact that they have done them, but why they've done them that I would prefer to focus on for the next couple slides at least. So disable overlay. Everyone disables this as soon as they get a Drupal site. The idea sounds nice initially, right? I'll make edits on one page, and I'll be back on the same page when I'm finished editing. I'll get dropped right back here where I left off. But in reality, overlay causes 3 issues that are deal breakers for me. The first one of those is that it reloads the page multiple times. So as I make changes, I inevitably need to submit forms, hurdle, are you sure you want to do this, yes or no, delete this thing or not, kind of pages, and to a lesser degree I have to clear the caches to get a menu rebuild or something like that to function. In any case, the DOM ends up having to be fully reloaded, which means not only that the configuration page that was overlaid needs to be reloaded, but the page behind it needs to be reloaded as well. It's extremely irritating. Second, overlay depends on JavaScript. which means that there are JavaScript issues galore when you start using it with JavaScript-intensive contrib modules. Also very irritating. The third issue I have with Toolbar is that for me it ends up being a useless use case. I end up working in multiple browser tabs when I uncover a bug. So someone says, I see this thing, and I go to replicate it. I replicate it, and I keep it in that tab. I open up another tab, do all my work, and then I want to refresh the thing that I was just looking at. That was wrong. So I don't want to be taken away from that and then come back to it on the same page. It might have been any number of things that I changed that did that, and I might want to experiment with the actual solution, or what I thought might have been the actual solution, because I might have done 2 or 3 things that I think could have fixed it, and I can experiment if I keep them in separate tabs. Anyway, this way I can control when the refresh occurs as well, so we're not just refreshing the page all the time. We have an easier an A/B comparison for the problem we were trying to solve. The second piece of low-hanging fruit that I see on almost every Drupal site is the toolbar being disabled. And the reason for that is that there are basically no power user features available in Toolbar. So when we're building sites as developers, we get frustrated with this. So what do I mean by no power user features? So to get to, say, structure, content types, manage fields, and then edit, we have to click 4 times on 4 separate pages to get done what we need to get done. This isn't any good. So we've made these 4 clicks unacceptable. What can we do instead? We can enable administration menu. And I see this on almost every site. But I think there are some problems with the admin menu when you start handing something like that. It's very good for a site builder. But when you hand that over to a content manager, there are several problems with this approach. The first one you can kind of see happening here. And although we can dive right in from content to article to manage fields to tags to delete, and we can do that all in one click, we have to very carefully hover before we do that one click. So we get this horribly irritating hover tunnel sort of effect. But we've accomplished our task in about a quarter of the time, if we can avoid that. So thinking about admin menu, it is a mega menu. We try to stay away from those on client-facing sites. Should we use it for a content manager when they're on the admin interface of the site? Because those two are very different questions. What is acceptable for the general public could be unacceptable for a content manager, and vice versa. And I think whether or not you should use a mega menu is use case specific. It definitely makes sense for power users. In the case that I just described, you can do something in a quarter of the time, but it does not make sense for novice users. It confuses them. And I think that there are several reasons why mega menus are not appropriate for novice users. Mega menus assume that users know what they want. They contain a ton of information, but it's all nested in a giant menu. It's called a mega menu for a reason. And even if you do know what you want as a power user, the assumption behind the mega menu is that the information is organized in such a way that you can find it quickly, which in Drupal, because of the contrib module space, isn't always the case. So we're not going to use mega menus for novice content managers. Maybe we'll use it for more advanced ones. As an aside, I would like to note that shouldIuseAMegaMenu.com is not taken. So there's a visibility opportunity for someone out there. I was shocked when I was putting these slides together to find out that that was the case. But you have to compile some data to compete with the should I use a carousel. Again, I got to this a little bit in the last slide. So average content managers aren't going to want to use a mega menu. They're in addition to the fact that we assume they know what they want and that it's organized well, as a novice content user, you're going to look at this top-level menu that's exposed by admin menu and think there are just way too many options here, some of which I don't even understand. And that makes that's irritating to the user because it's immediately intimidating. They're not going to be able to find what they're looking for.
Well, wait a minute. depends on what permissions you've given.
That's true, and I will get to that. Okay. That's a very good point. All right, what was I thinking here? Okay, language. Yes. So in particular, something like structure. Like, that means something to us as people who work with Drupal every day, but imagine the first day that you're handed Drupal. What does structure mean to you? Like, you search sort of in your memory for uses of the word. Maybe you get architectural vibes. Maybe it's like men's clothing from the 90s, or maybe you correctly think that it's like too generic to communicate anything specifically meaningful unless you have context. How about modules? That sounds scary. Like, imagine the soap couple we were thinking about earlier. They're like, they probably still use AOL for their email. So, like, modules is a word that's going to terrify them. They don't know what they're going to uncover there. So, I've lost my train of thought here a little bit. Apologies. So even if you do understand where things are, like what structure means and what modules means, things get hidden in this mega menu. An example that I run into all the time is, as an experienced developer, is if I want to like update the file type display, say I'm using the media module, that doesn't live under configuration where the rest of the media stuff lives. It lives under structure where I can change my file types and the displays associated with them. So this stuff like tricks me, and I do it every day. So I think that there's a strong use case for trying to simplify the first experience that users get. When they hit a menu, they have to be able to make a choice that's digestible to them. You shouldn't give them so much information that they have like option paralysis and they just don't know what to do. Hold on one second. I think I may have gotten... Oh, I see. So this slide, although I lost my train of thought a little bit, was meant to say that, so that really long cascade that we got to, in addition to all the other reasons, admin menu does not work very well on mobile. So as a developer, we're sitting at a computer every day, and like at a desktop computer every day, so we have the screen real estate to be able to get to whatever we need to in that mega menu. But if I am updating content on the go, like think if I was someone at a news agency, and I was trying to, the freshness of the content was really important. I might need to update that on my cell phone on the go. So that completely disqualifies at least the default behavior of the admin menu, because I can't get to what I need to. If I needed to go to structure, content types, article, manage fields, that is what would happen if I were even able to mouse over that on my phone in some way. We just don't have enough screen real estate to do it. So sadly, it's not accessible on mobile. But fear not, we have some solutions for this. Enter Navbar. And I'll say specifically that I'll try to make some Drupal 7, Drupal 8 comparisons. Maybe some of what we learned was wrong with Drupal 7 we fixed in Drupal 8. I'll try to highlight some of those, specifically with respect to the design principle that led us to make that decision, because that's what's important. It's not important that it's done for us. It's like, how can we then take that good idea and apply it to other things that will make our content managers' lives better. So Navbar is basically a direct backport of the Drupal 8 default navigation system. So there's a D7 version on the left and the D8 version on the right. So we get all of the benefits for free in Drupal 8 that we would have to install with a series of modules in Drupal 7. And I'd like to dive into now what makes Navbar a better experience than, say, the built-in toolbar experience or the admin menu experience that we looked at for Drupal 7. So, calling back to what I mentioned before, the number of menu items in admin menu off the bat is 10. Whereas if we look at Navbar, we have 3 items. And to us as developers, that might be irritating to have to dive that second level deep, but your average content manager is going to look at that and say, I can do this. Like, I can dive in right now and make a choice, and then make another choice, and then make a third choice, and not get the option paralysis. So we're sort of breaking down the decisions into bite-sized chunks that they feel like they can manage. So let's divert our attention from Drupal a little bit to reinforce this point about why it's important that we give users bite-sized chunks. On the left here, we have American Airlines Find a Flight. You look at that form, and a user immediately thinks, this is going to be painful. Like, I don't want to fill out that whole form. It's gigantic. Also, it doesn't look very good on mobile. You look at the second form, and your thought is almost definitely, this is going to be a breeze. I can do this. All I have to do is type in these things. And maybe when you start touching the screen, you get more information. And at that point, if you were to look at the fully expanded form, it would be equally as big as the other one. But you're not intimidated from the get-go. You start making decisions, and you get like a positive outcome of that first decision. And so you have more incentive to keep moving down that path and not be frustrated. No one likes filling out forms. So you got to make it easy for them. So back to Drupal now. We've made it easier for the user to dive in, but I'd also like to call attention to another attribute of Navbar that I think is much better than admin menu, and that's that it includes icons. And icons allow for two important things that not having icons does not allow you to do. And that's that users can visually navigate items more quickly. So your eye can be drawn to like a common pattern recognition a lot quicker than it would be maybe to text. And it also gives developers a way to indicate what a menu item does beyond describing it with potentially confusing language. So everyone knows what like the hamburger menu does, but they might not know what structure does. It becomes a little more difficult if you talk about modules. You know, I think Drupal suffers from that a little bit in Drupal 8 with the puzzle piece. But it gives you another way to communicate the same idea as your written language is trying to communicate. So as a bonus, in Navbar, we get shortcuts back. When you use administration menu, shortcuts are gone. And as a point-and-click UI element, shortcuts are very effective because if users, content managers, are going to be repeatedly doing the same tasks, you should create a shortcut for them. Creating a menu item requires you to do a hook menu, which a lot of folks are not prepared to do. But content managers with shortcuts can just click in the UI and create those shortcuts for themselves. So if they find themselves on a page and are terrified that they're never going to be able to find that page again, they can at least accomplish that without contacting you, the developer, to get that done. So that's another nice benefit. Having shortcuts be first-class citizens, I think this slide says what I just said. Yeah, it basically means like this is just showing really the shortcut menu and the benefits of it. So you can add content, find content. What we're looking at now is like if I had click shortcuts, I would have these options available to myself. Meaning that these are the default ones, but you can configure that white bar to be any number of things that you would commonly do on your site. If it's like adding a contact, if it's a CRM kind of site, it can be that as well. So in addition to solving some of our organizational and visual gripes, meaning like we went from too many top-level items to fewer, we had poor organization, now we have shortcuts a little bit better. We can get to that stuff easier. Obfuscated language, maybe mitigated a little bit by icons. Navbar is also a good idea because it allows for mobile menu navigation. So we can get from that top-level menu down to structure, down to menus, down to the main menu, and we're now 3 levels deep in that menu on a mobile device, which wasn't possible if we were using admin menu on the desktop device. Notice that I didn't navigate to the same place that I tried to navigate to before, which was structure, content types, article, manage fields. And that's for some reason because you can only go down to the content types level using Navbar if you were to be within structure. Notice that there's no drop-down menu next to that. Here. There's no drop-down, but for menus we do have a drop-down. I'll call back to this later in the talk. So admin menu recap. We've made it. Less is more. So how do we translate this oft-used cliche into principles that will actually aid us in making our content managers' lives better? One, we can shoot for a high dive-in factor. You got the second, and both of them. that was a slide mistake. So while good for power users, mega menus are going to intimidate users that are not as familiar with the technology, and they present too much information, so you get that like sort of overwhelm factor. The less visible options that we show to folks, often the better, because they can start making choices and get that positive goal achievement cycle flowing. And that in turn makes picking up the technology less challenging, which was, if we call back to sort of the first slide, one thing that we were worried about. It lowers the barrier to entry, so it's not going to frustrate users to just throw the technology out. And it gives users a better first impression of Drupal if they feel like they know what they're doing. So they end up trusting you more, so that later on down the line in the project, they're going to continue doing so. The second development principle, which snuck onto the screen already, is that the visual cues aid in recall memory. So wherever possible, when we're developing an admin experience, we both want to shoot for the high dive-in factor and use visual cues to allow people to navigate things quicker, because your brain is going to learn these patterns, and the more and more you use it, the quicker you'll get at it. Icons are important because they provide more information in minimal space, which is particularly helpful on mobile, and they're language neutral in many cases, or they're language neutral, not in many cases at all. So there definitely aren't universally understood icons for a lot of things, but for many things there are. And the third development principle that we can carry forward is that mobile functionality is a must. It's 2016, and content managers inevitably are going to want to edit on the go, so we need to make that a possibility. So admin menu in that sense is kind of a no-go. So let's see if we can do a little bit better than admin menu, or how we can make not only the menu experience, but the admin theme experience more palatable. We're going to be able to apply some of these same sort of design positives that we talked about and learned over the menu section to the actual interaction on the page, so saving notes, things like that. And we start by just choosing a good admin theme. There are several out there that are solid. Shiny and Ember give you a good starting point. Those are both for D7. They don't have D8 ports yet. Adminimal is my personal favorite. That's available for D7 and for D8. Shiny was mostly a sandbox for ideas that later went into Drupal 8. So if you look at the Drupal 8 admin theme, it looks very similar to what you'll get with Shiny. Ember is a slightly more Google-y looking theme and functions similar to Shiny. And I say that from like a flat design perspective. Adminimal also uses flat design, which makes it kind of Google-y looking. But I don't say that with contempt at all. There's a reason why Google uses this sort of flat design, and it's that it is a fantastic way to get your eyes to go where you want them, or to get content managers' eyes in this case, to go where you want them to go. So, yeah, we'll take a look at an example of colored buttons as an example of good design, getting your eyes to go where you want them to go. So on this page, we're looking at the Shiny theme, I believe. And blue to me certainly doesn't mean go. In the lower left-hand corner, we're saving this. The delete key, this also took me probably like 10 seconds when I was developing this to figure out where that actually was. And so content managers are going to have an easier time if the save button, say, is green, hence title of the slide. So if we look at this in comparison, the Shiny in comparison to the Adminimal theme, which we're seeing now, the delete and save buttons are right next to each other, so that the spatial proximity of really taking any action that you're going to take on this menu item in this case are right in the same place. There's no looking at the save button and thinking, where's the delete button? I would like to do that. So that they spatially condense things and use colors as an indicator to say, this is, green means go, I'm going to save this, red means delete, it's going to go away. I could see an argument for putting the delete button all the way on that side to save the user from themselves, taste and preference sort of thing, but I think the colors communicate very clearly what the user wants to do. I find that analogous to the argument of like we shouldn't give users a way to get out of the shopping cart if they're already in there. And while it might increase conversions, you're going to frustrate a lot of people and probably ultimately frustrate more people than you convert or increase your conversions by.
When you're using the colors for education, do you have any concerns about accessibility?
That's a great question. No. I mean, yes, I do.
I mean, obviously, like the words say what you're going to do, but I was just curious.
I honestly didn't consider it. Although there was a talk about accessibility earlier, I should have sat in on that, I think. So I find that the use of colors here is somewhat analogous to the use of icons when we look at the menu. It makes your eyes sort of snap to very quickly what you want to do. Your visual recall is a lot better to perform whatever action that you want to perform.
One consideration is if you've got a content manager who is red-green colorblind, don't use that theme, just switch that theme for them.
Sure.
Yeah.
And an easy way to change this too.
Delete, like.
Correct. And before some folks showed up, I had mentioned that what we're trying to do is really make easy decisions along the way to improve the admin experience. You can always dive in and get as custom as you want with the admin experience. I'm just trying to stay as bare bones as possible. So if it is a red-green colorblind issue, then that's like one piece of custom theming you have to do that won't be available out of the box.
And AddMinimal has an option to do I think there's a CSS file option where you can write your own, not even a sub-theme, but just a CSS file to make some of those custom changes.
Very cool.
That I didn't even know. That's very cool. So tying together some of the positives of the AddMinimal train that we're kind of on, with what was good about the admin menu before, there is an admin menu module available for AddMinimal. It's called AddMinimal Admin Menu. And what I like about this particular admin menu is that in contrast to the admin menu that you would get by default, where these lanes are super tiny and you get that telescoping problem, and notice that the hover color isn't very different, so when you're hovering on something you don't have a very good visual indicator that that's what you're doing. With AddMinimal, they increase the size of those lanes, hence the Seinfeld joke and title of the slide. If you're all not familiar with the Seinfeld where Kramer can buys a stretch of what is it's some fake highway, but it's actually the FDR in New York, and he turns a 1 mile stretch of highway from a 2-lane road to a 4-lane road to a 2-lane road because he wants people to be able to experience a 2-lane comfort cruise, which creates massive traffic jams the next day. It's an episode worth your time. But what AddMinimal menu does here is not only increase your ability to physically perform the task of getting where you want in that admin menu really quickly, but it gives you the color indication in a much more stark contrast that you've done the thing that you've tried to do. So you get positive reinforcement right away that you've accomplished your goal. It has that same effect of the green means go. Your brain quickly registers it and you get positive feedback. Another reason why I really like the admin menu or AddMinimal menu sort of approach is that if you're using Navbar, it has a decent amount of JavaScript overhead. So this is sort of an aside from anything that is visual or design-oriented, and it's more technical. Navbar requires backbone, modernizer, and underscore, and I would prefer not to load all of that JavaScript on every admin page if I didn't have to. Another great thing about this particular admin menu, we looked at Navbar, which was different from the admin menu by default, in that admin menu by default is not mobile friendly. Navbar was mobile friendly. This thing looks and feels a lot like admin menu, but it's also mobile friendly. So in some sense, we've gotten our cake and eaten it too. We've mitigated that. As a sort of a recap, we've mitigated the hover tunnel problem that was presented by the original admin menu by widening those things a little bit. We've improved visibility when using the mega menu, and we've made the admin menu work on mobile. What we haven't done is used icons to aid in visual recognition. So one thing that's missing largely from these that is present in Navbar are the icons, which I think would be nice. And we have not eliminated the overwhelm factor that admin menu presents to novice users that they would see if they got like that right across the top. So we haven't gotten rid of this problem.
And that was just a theme.
That's just a theme, exactly.
So,
A theme with, I think, a lot of really good design choices that were made in it.
so the bottom line there is that your preference, your recommendation is as minimal theme with the as minimal menu. Is that correct?
I like that combo. But to jazz it up a little bit more, you don't want to have your users be overwhelmed when they, your content managers be overwhelmed when they hit the site. So we're going to have to call back to what you asked me about, which was limiting permissions. So when a content manager opens the structure menu, if you have very loose permissions, they see a whole bunch of stuff there. Blocks, block types, all the way down to views. And there's a lot of options and a lot of places to get lost in that menu. It could conceivably take someone 5 minutes to find what they're looking for if they had to go through each menu and all of the sub-menus within this mega menu. But if we limit the permissions to have them only see what they need to, and in the example of that mom and pop soap shop, they're probably not going to need to do anything in this menu. Muck with blocks or context or features or field collections, whatever I have enabled on this site. But it is likely they'll want to mess with menus. But you make it, by eliminating the number of choices in that menu, by really simply just limiting their permission set, you make it so that a wrong turn doesn't cost them so much. They're going to immediately understand whether or not they're in the right place because there's only a handful of menu items that will exist under any number of these. So a bad choice doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to get frustrated, which is going to increase that dive-in factor and keep them sort of rolling towards accomplishing whatever goal they came to the site to accomplish. So now that the content manager can navigate the admin menu a little bit better because we've set the permissions correctly for them, they'll be able to find pages and add content. So we're going to want to simplify the content creation process. We're going to try to use a little bit of that less is more philosophy when we're adding content. And the first way that I would recommend doing that is by using the field group module. Content creation is, of course, going to be incredibly complex, especially on node types with lots of fields. And field group allows you to mitigate some of that bulk up front that you get if you have tons of fields on a particular node type, for example. It allows you to create vertical tabs, horizontal tabs, accordions, div wrappers, all kinds of, whatever you want till your heart's content. But what I like in particular about field group, like right out of the box, it uses, I want to say, a collapsible div, a collapsible field div. So we could turn this facts field collection that we have here, which accepts 3 facts, and it ends up getting rendered on the page as 1 to 3 facts, depending on how many those users put in. On this particular site, notice that the facts are optional. None of those fields are required, but the title at the top is required. So whoever's creating this node might have to fill out the title and then any number of fields that we can't see below. And it's because there's this giant optional field there. Now, I happen to know that the content managers who use this site aren't going to use this on the majority of the nodes they're going to create of this type. So I feel obligated in some way to collapse that and make it something that they're going to opt into as opposed to be confronted with when they hit the site and think, every time I have to scroll by this thing. And if it were just collapsed and they could opt in, that would be a better situation. So if we use field groups, we can take this one giant set of fields and collapse it down into this very slender little facts area that they can open up if they want to use. Now this next example, I can't count the number of times I've demoed sites and had clients say, what are all those things for? Which are the default Drupal, I don't even know what they're called, at the bottom of the page.
Article tabs.
Vertical tabs, yeah.
Article tabs, thank you. Vertical tabs. And depending on what modules you have installed, you're going to get different ones. So like meta tags is one that won't be there by default, for example. And I think that the reaction of what are all these things for is a reasonable reaction. And I remember being in one client meeting in particular and having my project manager be like, why are you just telling them not to touch all these things? That the defaults are all good. Why have you not just hidden them then? And like she said all this with her eyes in glaring frustration with me because we just didn't have the budget. I was working quickly, we demoed it, and it wasn't something I thought about. So it's totally reasonable to think as a content manager, why do you have all these things there if I shouldn't touch them? So if the default settings are always what they need, just don't show these settings. Many content managers aren't going to have to mess with any of these things. If they have really basic sites like URL aliases, maybe. Very few people are going to get into meta tags if you've configured the meta tag module in a sensible way where the defaults are good for each of your node types. You have like a lot of granularity with something like meta tags to make good default decisions. So we can, with a small snippet of code, turn something like what we see on top to what we see down there, where all we're going to see is the URL path settings. And for this example, we're going to assume that the use case of the content manager is pretty basic, and that's all they want to do. So what we would want to do, just implement a form alter and ask the question. Let me back up for just 1 second. This hook assumes that we want to hide all but that ability to unpublish nodes, and that we're going to act on all node add and edit forms. So we want to treat that action tab, vertical tab. There we go. That piece of language I didn't know. I've been doing this for too long not to know that. So we're going to want to treat that the same across all node types. I don't think that's unreasonable to think that like one node is going to be like the other with respect to that group of actions in particular. So we hook into we use our hook form alter hook. We ask the question, is this a node form? And then, oops, wrong way. In this case, we're basically just asking, is this anyone other than the site administrator? And then with the set of stuff enclosed in that curly brace, we are saying remove all this stuff. So we're setting access to false for menu, redirect, revision, and authoring info. And what that gets us is the effect that we saw on the previous screen. So it's a pretty small chunk of code, but I think it goes a long way with respect to not having to explain to your clients that they just shouldn't touch any of this stuff. Because while this one example is who cares, we can just tell them that one thing here. But if you consider not really setting permissions the right way and not hiding these things, it compounds. And as a novice, you feel lost in all of this, I don't know what to touch or what to touch. And if you hide everything that they shouldn't touch, then they feel empowered. And they know that everything that I could possibly mess around with is something that I might actually want to use to accomplish a goal or to take an action.
I think you could use the same tactic you're using here to hide the promoted to front page and sticky at top of lists options, which are also seldom used.
You can.
And I think
I have a personal vendetta against those also that I'll get to later.
I think there's a module that will also do this. I could be wrong. Simplify.
There is. Simplify. I think
Yeah.
Simplify does it.
A little different.
Yeah. There's at least two modules I can think of that will hide at least portions of that. I think Simplify is one of them, and I can't remember offhand what the other is. So for
Override
those of us
node
who really
options
aren't
is
that
another one.
comfortable, I'm sorry.
Override node options
Yes.
is another one.
Yeah.
Good suggestions, definitely.
And if you don't have to add a module, this is really great.
Right. Yeah, you can accomplish it in just a couple lines of code in a custom module and have really granular access to hide anything that you want to hide. So getting to this gentleman's point.
Couldn't you get that same effect just by setting permissions appropriately? Don't give them permission to edit URL aliases, and that vertical tab goes away.
Exactly. For some of those things. I don't know if it functions the same way for all of the things in that menu. I think you have to, at a certain point, you would have to remove the ability to manage the content to get rid of...
It starts becoming a part of a problem where it requires
like
the person to have deep knowledge of where to find those permissions, the permissions page, or if it's on the node edit page, or if it's on this other page. Whereas you could just throw in a bit of code and handle it.
True. And I think specifically now that I've backed up to this slide, the publishing options, and I think the authoring information, just won't go away unless you remove the ability for them to edit nodes in general. I recall, but not specifically, that the permission was too much of a hammer.
Okay.
So to move forward to what he said, which was you can use the same sort of function to hide those promoted and sticky stuff. So it takes just 2 more lines of code to improve our content managers' lives if they don't need to promote or make things sticky. And those 2 lines of code are boxed in there. So now we get the result that we want. CMs can publish content, but and change the URL alias, but they can't do anything else. And we've done this for all node edit forms. So let's take a super quick look. Maybe I want to skip this part because we're running a little long. Do folks use beans instead of blocks? Or does everyone use blocks? Any bean users here? All right. So beans for Drupal 7 are what blocks are for Drupal 8. Essentially, it's like it makes the block an entity, which is much more. It gives it much more natural entity behavior than if you were using a block, which is treated very specially. So the next section, which I think I'm going to breeze through really quickly, is just that I prefer bean to block, and this is a little bit of a digression, so I'm going to move quickly through it. One undesirable effect of enabling the bean module is that you get this blocks menu item in 2 places, which is super confusing. And if you can make it such that your content manager only sees blocks in one place, like either under content or under structure, all the better. So if you're using the bean module and you can afford to limit their permission to edit blocks, I would highly recommend doing that because there's nothing more confusing than seeing blocks in 2 places. So I'm trying to make a tactical decision about how to get through the most of the other content here the quickest. We'll jump down a little bit further. So we're going to skip the block stuff for now and go to menu administration. So in addition to blocks and nodes, we can simplify the experience of adding menu items with a contriv module called Simplified Menu Administration. What I like about this module is that it eliminates another point of confusion. On the left here, we have 3 options for each of our menu items, and that's list links, edit menu, and add link. And as a content manager, I think I'd assume I'd want to edit the menu if I were trying to take an action on a particular menu item. But that's not necessarily the behavior that you get when you click edit menu in this case. We'll see that. We'll jump into that on the next slide. When we enable simplified menu administration, we get a condensation of that list into just edit menu and add link in this case, which are really the only 2 actions that you should have to take. You either want to edit the menu, some property of it, or you want to add something to the menu. There should be no distinction between list links, edit menu, and add links. List links doesn't make all that much sense. So what we would see if we clicked list links is a list of the links that were present in that menu. So we could add something from here, like adding a link from here, but we couldn't edit anything about the menu. If we wanted to change the title or the description or something like that of the menu, I think the title is the big one, we wouldn't be able to do it here. And that would be confusing to me as a content manager. So this is the list links page. Yeah, we have the option to see all the links on here. And this is the edit menu page where we can change the title and description of the menu. Now these are 2 separate pages. This is a perfect example of a place where we can condense the behavior into one page that can do 2 of these things very easily. And we do that with this module, the Simplified Administration module. When we use the module, we get on the right here the ability to list the links on one page and edit the title on the same page. So we've combined 2 functionalities into one, which is good for the content managers. Let's see, so we've reached the content creation recap. We went through the menu administration, some theme selection stuff, and now the less is more principle is coming up once again. We want to, if we are able to like group similar elements, it creates a way for users to visually dissect a form really quickly and isolate what they want to interact with and interact only with those pieces. So in the case of field group, we were able to collapse that field and save a lot of space on the form, getting users to the end of the form quickly. And think back to the American Airlines example. Showing less fields as opposed to more and allowing users to opt in is usually going to be more user-friendly. Similar field grouping similar elements is the first way that we are going to apply the less is more principle. The second way is that we only want to show required fields by default. Or rather, we only show required fields by default, exactly. So we don't necessarily want to expand a collapsible div if there aren't any required fields in there. We only want the users to have to opt into stuff if it's not required. We had a couple where we want to hide settings that won't change. So that was the example of the vertical tabs on the bottom, either via permissions or via a little hook. And the last one is that we want to consolidate actions onto a single form when possible. So now we have a better idea of how we are going to create content more effectively and get users through the content menu to create that content more effectively. Let's look at how we can find the content that we want to edit in the admin interface more quickly. So there are a couple easy wins in terms of contrib modules that you can use here. The first is administration views. On the left here, we see administration views disabled. And on the right, we see administration views enabled. What I like in particular about enabling this particular module is we are able to filter content by title, which is huge, because that's most likely what users are going to want to, or are going to recall when they're thinking about a piece of content that they might want to change. We can also do it by author. So there's the title one, we can do it by author. And if taxonomy terms are at play, you can filter by taxonomy. On this particular site, I was lucky enough to not even have to use taxonomy. Another nice feature of this module is that it filters all of the items in the resulting view down here via Ajax. And you get another added bonus if you install the views bulk operations module, which turns...
My hero.
So VBO allows you to perform bulk or mass operations on items, so you don't have to act on each one of them. So on the left here, the boxes, oops, wrong way. You're able to take any number of the actions that are in this box, change author, delete, change value, stick, unstick, which refers to sticky, promoted to front page, publish, unpublish, on whichever elements that you select with those checkboxes, so that you can do these bulk updates really easily. Now, an entirely separate way to get editors to content, as opposed to through the admin interface, is allowing them to edit that content in place. So thinking about the typical workflow of someone who goes to their site and they look at something and they think, okay, I want to make a change to what I'm seeing. No one ever thinks I'm going to go to the admin interface and update this thing, unless they're adding content, I think. So I think that Drupal 7 does a very bad job of allowing people to edit stuff in place. Drupal 8 does a better job of that, especially with the sort of JavaScript-y Spark, I think it's called, where you can click and type right in line. So in Drupal 7, we have like a little bit of a hoop to jump through, in that if this is the page that I want to hit, I have to know that to allow this sort of functionality to edit this, whatever it is that I'm seeing, whether it's a node or a block, the core contextual module has to be enabled for me to be able to either edit or delete that thing. But ultimately, content managers want that. They want to see something and they want to be able to click it and allow it, or allow it to be edited. Red boxes to show that's what they wanted to edit.
So I think the D8 edit module has been backported to Drupal 7, and it's something like Quick Edit,
The in-place editor?
maybe.
That sounds good.
That sounds cool.
Is that working though? I tried it quite some time ago and it wasn't.
I'm not sure how well it works.
I have not used it. I do know, although it's not a plug for the platform in general, that the some of that in-place editing stuff and WYSIWYG stuff works really nicely in Backdrop because it's a little bit further ahead with respect to some of those features than D7 is, because people kind of bailed on D7 when D8 came out, or was in late stages of development. So I had promised to get back to the sticky thing earlier in my personal vendetta against them. Why I recommend that clients usually not use sticky or promoted to front page, and that is this. You get to a page like this. This is a site that I recently launched, and they have these news items, and these are, I think the content type is literally called news. We have a giant featured item, we have this next item, we have that item. So news items are chronological. They all have dates attached to them. So our thought from the beginning is like, this is a perfect fit for a view. It's going to have 3 items. It's going to be reverse chronological. I can use even an offset to have the first of those items. The only time where the thing goes out is when I'm actually using it. So yeah, you can use a different view mode for these, and everything will be great. But inevitably, the clients don't want like a reverse chronological listing of the news, and to have the clients use sticky or promoted to front page to manage this is kind of a nightmare, because not only is this promoted to front page, if it happens to be the only one, we have to go in and edit this node, remove the promoted to front page, go into the node that we want to promote it, and if there's anything else in the database that is also promoted and wins on the secondary sort, which might be chronology or something like that, the client's going to have a really hard time finding that. As a developer, super easy to dive in and figure out what's going on, but to them, they just look at this thing and they're like, I want to change that. And that gets back to the importance of in-place editing. Like, I see something and I just want to change that.
To translate that to back-end developer nerd speak, you had a system-driven process that automatically decided for you what content was going to be in the slideshow and its order, and your client wanted an administratively controlled process where they can control not just what pieces of content show up there, but the order in which they are displayed.
Exactly. And even when it comes to something where they're like, oh no, it's not, it's going to, like, I'm always going to want it in that order, without question, they're going to want to promote something a little bit longer than, or like it has more traction, it's getting a lot of donations driven from that thing, so they want to keep it up there a little bit longer. So in short, don't do it if do not use sticky or promoted to front page if one of these things is true. The element is visually focal, it's going to be changing often, and the user wants any amount of control over what order those things are going to be showing up in. What I did instead on this site was I created a bean type, which could create a node type, of course, and I just had a single entity reference field that controlled what sort of content could be selected on the other side of that entity reference field, what the destination type of content could be, and I placed that via context. You could use panels or whatever. Context just is my placer of choice. This allows the user to take advantage of the core contextual module and use this little cog of an in-place editor and say, I want to configure that block. So they're going to go to a screen now, if they click configure, where there's just one item, and that's it, which is fantastic, because they don't have to go in and find a bunch of nodes in the admin interface, which really would take you into the admin structure content area of the site, and you'd be searching for 2 or 3 different things, having to interact and save all of them. So you can save the user that sort of multiple round trip in that case by just allowing them to do something like this. They start typing in their autocomplete field. It's looking for a node of type news. They find it, they hit enter, they save the block, and they win. So in-place editing recap, less clicking is more. We want to use the contextual module when possible. And don't use promoted or sticky toggles if stuff is going to have high visibility. So to recap sort of the entire talk, what did we accomplish here? We improved the dive-in factor via better practices in the administration menu. We did this by disabling a few core modules enabling another few contrib modules, and choosing a good admin theme. We were also able to simplify the content creation process, and we did this with respect to nodes. We skipped over the beans and blocks part, although slides are posted. And we were also able to simplify the creation of menu items. We improved the user's ability to find content, and we did that mainly through the use of contrib modules. So that's a really easy win that you can just flick those on views, bulk operations, and admin views. And we allowed effective in-place editing, so the user doesn't have to use the menu as much if they can just see what they want, click it, and have the edit capability, and be dropped back on the page that they were on. That sort of is the promise of overlay, but it actually functions in a little bit better of a way. So what are the wins of having accomplished these things that we did? The Relief International site that you've been seeing, I experienced the following wins as a result of making these sort of small decisions. We lowered the learning curve for site administrators. The folks at Relief International were not technically savvy whatsoever. They had a content management team of one recent graduate from Georgetown, and I was often communicated directly with the CEO. Tiny nonprofit, not very technical. So lowering the learning curve for these people, if their time is that valuable when they onboard new employees to this nonprofit, they're not going to have the time to sit down and explain a really complicated backend to their website. They want it to be as intuitive as possible so they can pick it up and just use it. So eliminating all of that clutter that we gutted is super important for them not having to ask, what about this, what about this, what about this? Am I going to break it if I do that? And puts the highest level administrator a little bit at ease knowing that if they give that person permission to use the website, that they're not going to break anything. There's not going to be anything in there that they can totally screw up. It also built trust really early in the development cycle, which was fantastic. Their first impression of Drupal wasn't bad, and so they didn't carry that forward. They were like, this seems great. It looks more or less like what I expected. It cut down tremendously on the hours that we needed to spend training and providing really trivial support, like how do I do this, how do I do that, stuff that clients often think is your job and ends up being, in your mind, content management issues. But that stuff is easier when you make a few good decisions on the admin interface side. And that allowed us to focus and spend all those development hours on more advanced functionality, which wasn't only good for the client because they were excited that we could build fancier things for them, but it made my job way more interesting. I do like supporting clients, but not in the way where they're asking you stuff where you're like if I only did my job better, this would be easier for you and you wouldn't have to ask. And the last bit is we allowed clients to stage content a lot more quickly because we eliminated a lot of the visual clutter and made the amount of clicks that they had to take to get through any given workflow minimal. They were able to whip through content, which pretty dramatically reduced the stress in those really crucial days and weeks prior to launch. So that's usually the tensest time where clients are real nervous about getting the thing out the door. That is all I have for you today. Thank you very much for listening. Any questions or feedback? Modules you use to also simplify the admin interface?
So could you recap again which modules are required to replicate the place editing that you described?
In Drupal 8, you get a lot of that for free. In Drupal 7, you enable the core contextual module. And it's just called contextual. Yeah, sometimes the menus that you get from those can be a little wonky if you use beans or more complicated data structures, because you'll get a configure, because beans are an instantiation of a block, so you'll get an edit block, configure block, and one more option. And edit and configure seem like they ought to do the same thing, but one of them references the block interface, one of them references the bean interface. But more or less, for nodes, it works right out the box. You can either delete the node or edit the node right away. And you sometimes have to pay a little bit of attention to the theme, because those boxes, if themers don't theme them the right way, the boxes will fill the div that they're in. And so you can end up with a box, like a cog wheel that we were clicking for a little square of content that ends up pretty far away from and on the opposite side of the screen of that div if the themer doesn't think about that and make that choice. So it can be a little, that's like one caveat that can make that a little tricky.
It's probably worth mentioning that you can use contextual links in views as well. So like if you have like a listing of events or something like that that you've done in views, you can have each one of them be directly editable by adding the contextual link in the view.
That is true, and very helpful. The example that I showed actually of that little content block on the left was in fact a view.
Probably did, yeah.
But a lot of the other stuff I did on the site wasn't a view, so that is a really good point. And you first.
So, to add to this, there is a project which incorporates not all of the things that you talked today, but many. It is called Tasty Backend, and there is Modus on Rabbit podcast number 80, and there is a session from Amsterdam in 2014 where they explain, it's an installation profile that many of those things are, there. You just have 80% of what you explained today in an installation profile. And I think you can even have the modules installed individually, like a feature, and you get everything for granted. And on top of that, of course, you do your customizations, but at least you have a base for that, and it's called Tasty Backend.
Tasty Backend. Yeah, at the agency that I work at, we do have an installation profile that will set up a lot of these things. And the talk kind of came out of several sites that I did where we kept uncovering better and better and better ways to do things, and ended up coming up with something eventually that sounds like what this Tasty Backend is. And yeah, I definitely would recommend having an installation profile to take care of these things for you, and other things like your choice of editor. If you're using CK Editor or whatever it is, and any customizations that you often make to that toolbar less gigantic out of the box, for example. Because all those things should be programmatic. You don't want to start every site and think, God, I got to do another WYSIWYG configuration. Get it in code.
In your demo, you showed how you were able to use Beam in order to control the user interaction that you wanted for the front slideshow. But have you found that clients are typically asking for, I want landing page kind of A, and then I want another landing page kind of B, and I just want a system that allows me to deliver those kinds of landing pages? Are they looking for the ability to configure a slideshow as a separate thing so that they focus on just configuring the slideshow? Or are they asking for a page that can control all the things that are showing up on that page?
More often that they want to control everything on the page, if I'm understanding your question correctly.
Right.
When people see things, they just want to poke it, right?
Yeah.
They want to touch that thing and edit it, right away.
Right.
And so I think that notion is the answer to your question, and what I find clients most often wanting.
Okay.
Yes.
Which module again is required for the shortcuts, or is that a theme?
Shortcuts come out of the box in Drupal 7 and in Drupal 8. If you use the admin theme or admin_menu, it will remove that by default. But if you use something like in minimal and that admin menu, which is a minimal admin menu, it keeps that around for you, I believe.
You can get the shortcuts back with admin menu.
You just have to have another module.
Well, it's a sub-module that comes with it.
Okay.
And it's like not intuitive, obvious. It's like special admin menu or something settings, but it's right there underneath it. It's just doesn't sound like what you turn on to get it back.
Exactly.
And each user can customize their own shortcut?
If you give them that permission.
Up to six links in the toolbar per user.
Up to 6 links in the toolbar.
Okay.
And only if you give them permission, based on their role.
Or you could assign that maybe to a group?
Likely. I don't know the answer to that question offhand. But my strong suspicion is yes.
And the back-end shortcuts are kind of weird. They are tied per user, but there are ways to copy like programmatically, you copy the shortcuts from one user to another. It's kind of difficult, not really worth the effort.
And you could, of course, just chuck the entire admin interface if you have the money to develop something custom. You can use views, create a nice dashboard, and I don't recommend the dashboard module that comes with Drupal. But just give your users some giant buttons for what they need to do if their needs are simple, and have that be what they see when they go to /user. It does, mucking with /user definitely takes some experience. I wouldn't recommend doing it unless you were, a developer comfortable with PHP. But I've done it for several sites where what they want when you log in is like a membership management page, and they just want that to be right there on user. So,
You can drop an arbitrary block in /user without even thinking about it.
right. It's when you start trying to mess with like the form submission piece of that the behavior can get a little wonky, because I think
Not
it's
so in
expects
Drupal 8
certain
because
things.
we have the ability to have different form display modes. So like
Right.
if you wanted to vary the registration process based upon one context or another, you can vary how many fields, which fields, the order of fields that are shown up in those different contexts.
What he's referencing is similar to what you got with like view modes, for example, in Drupal 7 now applies to many other types of content in Drupal 8, which is extremely useful.